John raised the rifle man to enter the house. Then explain it to me. He's shocked by what happens next. The wolves. The storm had been relentless. Then the figure changed. The landscape in the shadows around it melted. John Carter, a reclusive man living deep in the Alaskan wilderness, John's breath caught. Was used to harsh Emily's winters, mother stood before him. Felt different. Exactly as she had been the night she vanished. Whisper through the pines, her brown hair rattling his cabin windows as he sat by the fire, her eyes wide and sad. Then came the sound, she whispered, scratching. Let her come home. Then more Emily's breath hitched. At first, Mama, John thought it was the wind playing tricks on him. Not real. When he turned toward the door, under his breath, he saw them. Two Emily wolves, struggled against him, crusted with her tiny hands, their eyes filled with something he had never seen before in a wild animal. She's alive. Desperation. No, John's voice was quickened. That's not your mother. Behave this way. The woman, the thing pretending to be fierce predators, its head, not beggars at a man's doorstep. Her own blood. And yet, John gritted his teeth. Didn't snarl. She's not yours to take. The wind howled, they whined softly, the wolves snarled, their bodies trembling. The figure's expression hesitated. Neither is she yours to keep. To stay inside. Then, but the world moved. Something the primal lunged. Told him he couldn't John ignore fired. Them. With a deep shot breath, rang through the forest. Unlatched the door, the crack echoing like a freezing night. The wolves didn't run, dropping into the snow. One of them, a large grey male, hesitated, nudged John's leg before turning and looking toward the dense forest behind them. Emily clung to him as he sprinted for the cliffs, let out a low, pleading whimper, and took a few steps away. He didn't know how he was going to get down. He just knew they wanted him to follow. The wolves were right behind him. Rifle, the wind and flashlight. The ground sloped downward into his skin as he trudged after them. John's foot deeper into the storm. For a split second, crunching against the ice. Nothing but open air. His breath came out in thick clouds. The world dropped as he followed the wolves through the snow-covered trees. Emily screamed. Then he saw the cold swallowed them whole. And the last thing John saw before the darkness lurched as he ran forward. Was the figure standing at the cliff's edge, no older than 5, wrapped in a thin blanket. John hit the snow hard, her tiny face pale. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. Her small hands clutched through his ribs. Her breath faint. His vision blurred. He wasted no time. His ears rang. But he didn't let go of his arms. They tumbled down the icy slope, through the snow, rolling through the deep snow on either side, branches snapping as they crashed through the underbrush. Back at the cabin, the world was a blur of white and shadows. He wrapped the girl in warm blankets, howling past his ears, the fire, then rubbed her hands, whispering reassurances she likely couldn't hear. Pain radiating through every muscle. Sat by the door. He was half buried in the snow, watching, face down. Hours passed before the child stirred. Panic jolted, fluttered open. He twisted, confusion, ignoring the sharp ache in his side. She whispered, Emily, her voice barely audible. John's heart ached. He reached just for his radio away, calling for help. Snow, through crackling static. Relief hit him so hard he almost collapsed. A rescue team would come, but there was no time. It would take time. He forced himself beside the girl, wincing, offering her sips of warm water. Their fall. He looked at the wolves. They weren't safe. Did you know? Not even he murmured. Did you bring me to her on purpose? Their dark larger wolves lined the edge of the cliff, then turned to the door, silent. The storm had begun to settle, and then, without a sound, stepped forward. The wolves stepped out into the night, distant, disappearing into the white expanse. John swallowed hard, his mind spinning. His pulse pounded. He had always believed in survival. Now, the instincts of man scrambled to Emily, lifting her to her feet as he sat beside a child who would have perished if not for the wolves. But her gaze was locked on the figure above. He wondered if something greater had been at work, something beyond instinct. Something close to a miracle. The wind shifted, girl shivered carrying under the heavy blanket through the trees, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The wolves were making their way down. John knelt beside her. John grabbed her tiny hands between his palms. The snow was deep, warmth slowing into her frail body. The trees were dense, crackled, their bare branches flickering shadows across the log walls. Every step was a fight. Outside, but he pushed the wind still howled, lungs burning. But the storm was Emily kept pace beside him. The wolves remained by the door. She didn't never leaving the girl. Didn't cry. John felt their presence. She knew what was behind them. Their bodies stole a glance strangely calm, as if they knew something were closing in. He had lived alone for years, too fast, trusting only his himself, clenched, relying on no one. They weren't going to make it. These animals had found the child before he barely visible brought him to her in a way that defied reason. Old, abandoned hunting cabin. Then John's heart leapt. Slowly, he veered color returned to the girl's Emily's hand tighter. Her fingers twitched. Almost there. Her lips parted, grew louder, and a tiny, breathless whisper escaped. John reached the cabin door and shoved it open. John exhaled, practically throwing Emily inside. He reached for a tin cup slamming the door shut behind them, letting a few drops of warm broth touch her tongue. His breath came ragged. She swallowed weakly. The wooden walls, her lashes fluttering open. This place wouldn't hold for long. Like a winter sky. Emily stood beside his, silent. You're safe now, John said softly, scanning the cabin, just looking for anything to use. She blinked, then turned her head slightly. her gaze drifting past him toward the wolves.
Inside the cabin,
her expression
John's
changed.
blood ran cold.
Not fear.
He turned,
recognition,
and froze.
John followed
Someone
her
else
gaze.
was in the room.
The wolves hadn't
standing
moved,
in the shadows,
but something about their stillness unsettled
watching,
him. The
waiting.
girl's tiny fingers
Emily's
twitched
voice
again,
was barely
this
a breath.
time grasping at
John,
the blanket.
I
trying
think
to
we
push
were
it aside.
expected.
John's
placed
breath
a gentle
stole
hand
his
on
chest.
her shoulder.
His grip
Easy
on the
now.
rifle tightened
You need to
as
stay
his
warm.
eyes adjusted
But
to
she
the dim
shook her
interior.
head.
Her lips
The cabin
barely
was
forming
small,
the words.
a single room
They
filled with
helped
dust
me.
and decay.
John frowned.
A collapsed wooden
The
chair.
wolves. A
She
rusted
nodded.
stove in the corner.
Her breathing was steadier
Broken
now,
shelves lined
but her
with
voice
old
remained
cans
fragile,
and forgotten
like
tools.
ice on the verge
and
of
in
breaking.
the shadows,
They
figure,
found me,
unmoving.
They kept me warm,
watching
until you came.
John swallowed
sat
hard,
back,
Who's
staring
there?
at the animals
No
in
answer.
a new light.
The air
It was
thick,
impossible,
heavy.
Wolves
Something
didn't do
felt
that.
wrong.
They were
Emily
wild.
clutched his arm.
Predators.
She wasn't
Yet,
shaking. Looking at them
she
now,
wasn't crying.
he couldn't deny
She
the
was
eerie
waiting.
intelligence in their
John's
eyes.
stomach twisted.
He turned back to the
She
girl.
knows something I don't.
What's your name?
Slowly,
Her tiny
he stepped
brows
forward,
furrowed,
rifle
as if she had to
raised.
reach through
His
layers of
boots
exhaustion
crunched
to
against
remember.
the frozen floor.
Emily,
the
she
figure
whispered.
shifted.
John
John
swallowed
stopped
hard.
cold.
He hadn't
Then
heard
it
any
spoke.
reports of
A
missing
voice
children.
like wind through
How
dead
had
trees.
she gotten out here?
You took her.
miles from anything.
John's skin crawled.
He grabbed his radio,
The figure stepped
adjusting
into
the
the faint
frequency.
light.
It was a
Static.
man, or had
He tried
been,
again.
once.
Come in.
His face was
This
gaunt,
is John Carter.
skin stretched tight
I've got
over
a
sharp
situation
bones.
here.
His
A
eyes
child.
were wrong.
Found her in
glowing.
the storm,
Just like the
Over.
ones in the
A
woods.
burst of static
Emily's
crackled
breath
back,
hitched, followed
John,
by a garbled voice.
The man didn't blink.
Then, clearer.
Didn't move.
Repeat.
You took
Did
her.
you say a
He
child?
rasped again.
Yes.
And now they
A
come
girl.
for you.
Name's
John's
Emily.
blood ran cold.
About 5 or 6.
Behind him,
the wolves
over.
howled.
A pause.
Emily turned
Then the
toward
voice
the door.
returned.
They're
Sharper,
here. Urgent.
John's pulse
John,
roared.
listen to me
He
carefully.
backed away from the
A
figure,
search party's
gripping
been looking
Emily's
for a
wrist.
missing girl for
They
2
had to
days.
get out.
They found the
man
wreckage
watched
of a
them with
car
something
20
close
miles
to
north
hunger.
of you. She was
No
never
sign
yours
of the
to
mother.
protect.
The
he
girl.
murmured.
And
Static.
now,
You both
then
belong
more
to the
words,
forest.
cutting through
The
like
wind
a blade.
slammed against the
Shouldn't
walls.
be alive.
Something
John's
scratched at the
pulse
door.
quickened.
Emily
He looked
looked
at
at
Emily,
now
not
drifting
with
back
fear,
into an exhausted
not with
sleep.
panic. 20
with
miles.
understanding. In this
She
weather,
turned to
in
John,
this cold,
her small fingers
no child
curling
could
around
survive
his.
that alone.
It's time,
His
she
gaze
whispered.
shifted back to
John's
the wolves.
chest
The
tightened.
larger one,
He didn't
its grey
know what
fur
she meant.
dusted with frost.
He didn't
stood
know
up,
what she was
stretching
about
its
to do.
long limbs.
But when
Then,
Emily took a
without
step
a
toward
sound,
the door,
it turned and
the
padded
wolves
toward
stopped
the door.
howling. The
And
smaller
the night
white
went
one
silent.
followed.
John
John's
moved
pulse
to stop
pounded
them,
in his
but
ears.
something held him
The
back.
silence was worse
The grey
than the
wolf
howls.
turned its
Thick,
head one last
heavy,
time.
unnatural.
Their eyes met.
Emily's fingers
Then,
slipped from
without
his
a
grasp
sound,
as she
the
stepped
wolf
toward
stepped
the door.
into the fading
John
storm
grabbed
and
her
vanished
wrist.
into the night.
Emily,
John
don't.
stood frozen.
She turned to
His
him,
mind
her
screamed
blue
for
eyes
answers,
calm,
but
too
none
calm.
came.
It's
Because
okay,
deep down,
she whispered.
he already knew.
No,
Emily
it
hadn't
wasn't.
been alone in the
Nothing
storm.
about this
and
was
something
okay.
far beyond
John
his
shook his
understanding
head.
had made sure
We
she
need to
made it
run.
home. But
Morning
Emily just
broke
looked
in a
at
dull
him,
grey haze.
really
The
looked
last
at him.
remnants of the storm
They won't
drifting
stop,
away
she
like
said
whispers in the
softly.
wind.
They never
John
will.
hadn't slept.
Not until I
He
go.
sat by the fire,
John clenched
staring
his
at the
jaw.
girl who still lay
That's not
curled
happening.
beneath the blankets.
Behind
her
him,
breathing
the
slow
man in
but
the
steady.
shadows let
Emily,
out a low chuckle.
The name felt
You still
strange
don't
on his tongue,
understand.
he
Foreign
murmured.
yet significant.
You can't take her
a
away.
child who had survived
She was
a
never
blizzard,
yours to
alone,
save.
except she
John
hadn't been
turned
alone.
sharply.
The wolves.
Then whose is she?
John's eyes
The man
flickered
stepped
to the door,
forward,
half
the dim light
expecting to
catching
see them
his
standing
features.
there again.
His face
Either
was
the
wrong.
storm had knocked
Too
out
pale,
the signal,
too
or
hollow,
help was
too
taking longer
old.
than expected.
Not in years.
Either way,
in
he was on
something
his own
else.
for now.
Time.
John rubbed a
Decay.
hand over his face,
Something ancient.
exhaustion weighing heavy
He
on his
smiled.
bones.
She is
He wasn't
theirs.
used to company.
A sudden gust
let
of
alone
wind
caring
slammed
for a
into the
half-frozen
cabin.
child.
The door
He had
rattled.
spent years
The
avoiding
walls
people,
groaned,
keeping
Emily's
his distance
hair
from the
lifted
world.
slightly,
And
though
yet,
she stood
here he
perfectly
was,
still.
tending to a
Then,
girl who
the
had
door
appeared out
creaked
of
open,
nowhere, led to him
not
by
from
creatures
force.
that shouldn't have
She
cared.
looked up at him.
The radio sat
sad,
on the table,
certain.
silent. They already
After his
decided.
brief
transmission
John,
last night.
the wind
there had
roared
been no
through the open
response.
door.
A soft
figures
rustling
moved.
pulled him from
John
his thoughts.
yanked her back.
He turned
No,
just as Emily's
I won't let
eyelids
them
fluttered
take you.
open.
For
Emily's
a
small
moment,
hand
she
pressed
simply
against
stared
his
at the
chest,
ceiling,
her
not
small
fighting,
fingers twitching
not
against the fabric of
resisting,
the blanket.
reassuring.
Then, her
They're
gaze
not
shifted taking to him, she whispered.
You stayed.
I'm
she
going
whispered.
home.
John's breath
swallowed.
hitched.
Yeah.
He shook his
I
head.
did.
No.
Emily's lips
He
parted
wouldn't
as if she
accept
wanted
that.
to say more.
Wouldn't let
but then
her
her
go.
brows furrowed.
Wouldn't.
Slowly,
Emily
she
smiled
pushed herself
softly.
up, her
Then
fragile
she
frame
stepped
trembling
forward.
from the effort.
Into the cold.
John reached
Into
out
the dark.
instinctively. Into
Hey,
them.
Take it
John
easy."
lunged after her.
But Emily wasn't listening. The wind
Her
howled.
wide blue eyes darted around the cabin
and swallowed
panic
her whole.
flickering in them like
Gone.
a candle in the
Just
wind.
like that.
"Where are they?"
John stumbled
she
into
asked,
the snow,
her voice barely
chest
above
heaving,
a whisper,
eyes wide.
John didn't need
She
to
was
ask
gone.
who she meant.
The forest
They
was
left,
silent.
he said carefully.
The wolves, gone.
Went back into the
figures,
wild.
gone.
Emily shook her
Nothing
head.
remained. No.
Nothing except
They wouldn't
the
leave
wind.
me.
And
John
the man in the
sighed,
cabin,
rubbing the back
watching
of his
from the
neck.
doorway.
They're wolves.
His hollow voice
Kid.
drifted through the
That's
night.
what they do.
It was never
But
your
Emily's
choice.
expression
John
remained
fell
troubled.
to his knees in the
She
snow.
gripped the blanket
His breath
tightly,
came in
as
ragged
if grounding
gasps,
herself.
and for the first time
They said
in his
they
life,
would stay until
he
I
had
was
no
safe.
idea what to
John
do next.
stilled.
John
He
ran,
heard the words,
his boots crunching through the
understood
snow.
them.
His
But
breath
the way
coming
she said
fast
them,
and
so
sharp.
certain,
The glow
so
flickered
absolute,
ahead,
sent a
weaving
shiver up
between
his
the
spine.
trees like a will-o'-the-wisp,
said,
leading
he
him
echoed.
deeper into the
Emily
unknown.
met his gaze.
He didn't
Her face
hesitate,
unreadable.
didn't think.
They talked to me.
Only moved.
Silence
Because
filled the
Emily
cabin,
was out
broken
there.
only by
The
the
wind
faint
howled
crackling
through the
of
trees.
the fire.
Carrying
John
whispers
felt
that
something
slithered
cold
under his
settle
skin.
in his chest.
The deeper he
He
went,
opened his
the
mouth,
more the forest
then
changed.
closed it.
The
He
trees
wasn't sure
wrong,
what to say to
taller.
that. Emily must
Twisted.
have sensed his
Their
doubt
bark
because
like
she looked
frozen
away,
veins,
her tiny
pulsing
hands
beneath his
clenching the
fingertips
blanket.
when he brushed
"You
past
don't
them.
believe me."
The air
John
thicker,
exhaled slowly,
heavy with something ancient.
He hesitated,
something watching.
choosing his words
Then
carefully.
the ground shifted.
"I think maybe
John
the cold
stumbled
messed
to
with
a
your
stop,
head a little.
his chest
You
heaving.
were out there a
The
long
snow
time,
beneath
and
him was
sometimes,
different.
when you're close
Not
to
soft,
freezing,
not
Emily
fresh, hardened.
Emily's voice
like
faltered.
ice.
Her fingers
Like glass.
tightening around the
He
edge of
swallowed,
the blanket,
glancing down.
She wasn't looking at
and his
John
breath
anymore.
caught.
Her gaze had
Beneath
drifted to
his
the window,
feet,
where the
reflections.
endless white of
Not
the
of
snow-covered
himself.
wilderness stretched
Not of the
beyond
trees.
glass.
But
John
of them.
followed her line
The
of
wolves.
sight, half
The
expecting
figures.
to see movement.
The ones
the
who had
flicker of
taken
grey
Emily,
or white fur
watching from
disappearing
beneath
into the
the
trees.
ice.
But
Their
there was
glowing
nothing.
eyes burned up
Just
at him,
silence.
empty and endless.
He sighed,
Their
leaning
mouths
back
moved,
against the wooden
whispering
chair,
soundless
rubbing his
words
temples.
he couldn't understand.
"All right," he
Then
said finally.
Emily,
"Tell
she
me
was there,
exactly
in the
what
ice,
happened."
looking
From
up
the
at
beginning.
him.
Emily
Not afraid,
hesitated,
not
then
crying,
nodded.
just
She took a
watching.
shaky breath.
John's stomach
"We were
twisted.
driving," she
He
said.
dropped to his
"Me
knees,
and Mama,
pressing a hand
it was
against
really
the frozen
late,
surface,
and the snow was
Emily,
everywhere." Her
Mama
lips
said
moved.
we had to get
A
somewhere
whisper.
before the storm
His
got
heart
worse.
pounded.
John
He
felt a
strained to
cold
hear,
weight
but the
settle in
ice
his stomach
cracked
beneath his palm.
He had heard nothing
sharp,
about a woman
splintering
traveling
sound.
with a child.
Then
No
a voice
reports.
behind him.
No missing
Low,
persons bulletins
familiar.
until last
You are
night.
not supposed to
Where
be
had
here.
they been going?
John whirled.
Emily continued.
The man from the
her
cabin
voice
stood
small.
among the trees.
Then the car,
his face
it
half-shadowed,
slid.
his
Mama
glowing eyes
screamed,
fixed on
and
John.
we hit something
John
really
rose
hard.
slowly.
I
His
think
jaw
we
clenched.
Her
Where
lips
is she?
trembled. The man
Mama
tilted
told me
his
not
head.
to move.
She is
She
home.
said she was going
John's
to get
hands
help.
curled into
John
fists.
stiffened.
No.
And did she?
She's here.
Emily's
I
blue
saw
eyes
her.
met his.
He motioned
and for the
to the
first
ice.
time, he saw
I just
something
saw
there
her.
that unsettled
The
him.
man's gaze
Something
didn't
deeper
waver.
than fear.
That is not for
She
you
didn't
to
come
take.
back.
John
inhaled
inhaled
sharply.
I'm not
but he said
leaving
nothing.
without her. He let
A
her
pause.
continue.
A long,
I waited a
heavy
long
silence.
time, Emily whispered.
Then the ground
it got
rumbled.
really cold. The ice
I was
beneath
scared,
John's feet
but I
fractured.
climbed out.
The whispers
I called
grew
for
louder,
Mama,
but
the
she
trees
wasn't there.
groaned.
Her
The
fingers
forest
played with
shifted.
a loose thread
John
on the blanket.
didn't move.
I started
run.
walking. He
I
stared
don't
the man
remember
down.
how far.
Dared him.
Just
the
finally,
snow, and
the
the man
wind,
exhaled.
and the trees.
His voice
John
was
clenched
almost
his
sad.
jaw.
20
Then you will
miles.
have to follow.
No child
ice
should have been able
collapsed.
to walk that
And
far.
John,
not in a
fell.
blizzard. Into
And
the
then,
dark,
he prompted.
into the whispers.
Emily's expression
into them.
changed.
John
She
plunged
shifted
into the
slightly,
darkness,
her
the
voice
cold
dropping
wrapping
lower.
around him like a
Then I
living
saw
thing.
them.
The
John
wind
leaned
roared in his
forward.
ears,
The
but there was no
wolves.
end to the
She
fall,
nodded.
only an endless
They
abyss,
came out of the
stretching
trees.
beyond sight.
I thought they were
Then
going to eat
impact,
me,
but they didn't.
He hit the ground hard.
They just stood
pain
there,
jolting
watching.
through his body.
She hesitated,
but the surface
glancing
wasn't
at the
ice.
window again.
Wasn't snow.
And then
it was
I
soft.
heard them.
John
sucked in a
frowned,
breath,
heard
blinking
them.
against the dim
Emily
glow
swallowed.
that surrounded him.
Not like
the air was
barking
thick,
or growling,
almost liquid,
like
shimmering
talking.
like light through
Inside
deep
my
water.
head,
He pushed
a chill
himself
crawled up John's
his
spine.
fingers pressing
What
into
did they
something
say?
that felt like ash.
Emily's lips
His
parted
breath
slightly,
caught, as if
this
unsure
wasn't the
whether she
forest
should speak
anymore.
the words aloud.
The trees were gone.
They said,
The sky
"Come
was
with
gone.
us.
And
We will
before
take you
him,
home."
stretching
The
endlessly
fire
into the
crackled.
horizon,
Was a
outside,
graveyard of
the wind had died down to an eerie stillness.
Ancient remains jutted from the ground she could have survived alone.
Some long-dead beast.
No way she should have made it through the storm,
too large to be human,
but she had,
lay half-buried
and
in the
somehow,
dust.
The wolves
Strange
had led
symbols
her to
were
him.
carved into
His
them,
hands
glowing
curled
faintly
into
with an
fists
eerie
against his
blue
knees.
light.
He
John's
had spent
stomach
years out
twisted,
here,
believing
what
he
was this
understood the
place?
wilderness,
A whisper
believing he had
drifted
seen
through the
everything
air,
there was to see.
soft,
But now,
familiar.
looking at Emily,
John,
at the quiet
his heart
certainty in her
stopped.
wide blue
Emily,
eyes, he wasn't
he
so
spun
sure
around.
anymore. He wasn't sure of anything. Standing at the edge of the bone distance, her small figure echoed in the strange glow. She looked different. John didn't move, not older. Neither did Emily. Not change. She only whispered, but lighter. They're still watching. Like she was becoming part of this place. The wind carried the howl through the trees. John took a shaky step forward, a sound that sent a ripple of unease through John's chest. She smiled softly. He didn't move. Neither did Emily. She sat upright now, her small hands clutching the blanket for a moment, her breath coming quicker. You shouldn't have. The flickering firelight cast shadows across her face. I came to take you home, making her look even more fragile. Faded. They're still watching. The ground she whispered again. The bones locked on the window, and from the darkness beyond her, to glance over his shoulder. Not wolves. The forest outside stretched endlessly, cloaked in shadow. Snow-covered branches swaying gently in the wind. Tall. He saw nothing but darkness between the trees, tight over impossible frames. He felt it too. Eyes hollow, something was out there. Their something had left. Clawed fingers stood twitching as they moved forward, reaching for his rifle out of instinct. Watching. The metal was cold against his palm. John's blood ran grounding him. Emily turned to face them. Superstition. She wasn't afraid. This was something else. She wasn't running. Get some rest. Knew them. He told Emily. John's chest tightened. His voice lacked conviction. Emily, we'll figure this out in the morning. Emily didn't argue. But as she lay back down, her head, she kept her eyes on the window. John could tell she wasn't behind her either. Their hollow eyes locked on John, and unblinking. The fire burned low, deep, casting like dull orange light something buried in time. Spoke. John sat by the window, yours to rifle across his lap. John's breath caught. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for. You have to go. But just before John shook his head. Not without you. Not the wind. Something closer. Certain. A light scratching against the cabin door. John stared at the girl, his heart pounding in his chest. And John's grip on the rifle tightened. The world collapsed. His pulse hammered, and everything went at Emily. She was awake, John woke to the staring at him wide-eyed against his skin. She heard it too. He was lying in the snow for a long moment, back in the forest. Neither of them moved. The trees stretching endlessly came again, soft. The sky above was the same steel grey as the desperate scraping of a starving animal through the branches. It was careful, but something was intentional. The weight in his arms was gone, her breath hitching. The warmth of Emily's small hand gone. John swallowed himself up. His throat was dry, his breath coming in ragged gasps. She shook her head, searching. They saved she wasn't there. They wouldn't hurt us. No footprints in the snow. John hesitated. No logical part of his brain screamed at him to leave the door shut. Just the hush of the winter woods, the part that had seen none of it had ever stand guard over her. But John knew better. That knew she shouldn't be alive. His hands trembled as he stared at the empty clearing. What if she was right? Emily was gone, the scratching stopped, not lost. Silence. She had chosen. The handle moved, and no matter how much he wanted to deny it, not like an animal lunging at the door. He knew the truth. It was she had never belonged to him. The forest had taken her back. His heart pounded so hard she had gone home. Emily might hear it. A bitter wind rushed through the trees, through the wood, carrying a whisper that curled through the air like distant laughter. The voice wasn't human. John's chest ached. It was deep. He had followed her to the edge of the world, ancient. But now something wild. With a heavy breath, he turned toward the cabin, the rifle, toward the empty house that would never feel the same. He didn't know what he was aiming at, but to go back. The handle still. But as he took his first step away, fell deathly quiet. He would never forget. And then, as the first light of dawn crept through the window, staring at the empty space where Emily had been. The wolves were gone. His body ached. For now, his mind reeled. John sat frozen. But nothing hurt his more than the hollow space in his chest where she once was. His breath came slow and measured. The wind howled through the trees. His mind was racing. The forest whispering secrets he could never understand. Unnatural. But one thing was clear. It hadn't been the wind. He wasn't sure how he had imagination. He didn't know if the creatures had spared him or simply cast him out. And it hadn't been the forest had made its decision. Emily was still staring at the door. It had never been his to change. Her small frame trembling beneath the blankets. Not stolen. She wasn't afraid the way a child should be. Chosen. She wasn't crying. John clenched his fist. Instead, fighting the urge to scream. Expectant. To fight. As if she had been waiting for this. The wind lowered the rifle, the silence, swallowing against the dryness in his throat. It wouldn't matter. He had seen a lot in his years out here, ever bring starving bears. He turned towards the distant glow of the wilderness, but the only thing left in this endless, the first rays of dawn crept through the window, steps were slow, cutting through the lingering shadows in the cabin. In the cold. Outside, would he ever understand what had happened? As if the forest itself would he ever know why Emily had to leave? He exhaled slowly. Maybe not. Emily, but as he reached the old wooden door, what exactly did they tell you? Hesitating on the girl hesitated. He made a silent promise. Her small fingers he would never forget the fabric of the blanket. Never stop looking for answers. They told me never let the forest take another. That they had been watching me for a long time, shutting the door against the wind. Slid down John's spine for certain. His grip on the rifle tightened. In the place where the world ended, Emily was nodding, her gaze dropping to the floor. Not just me, Mama too. John felt something shift in the air. something heavy settle in his chest. Emily's mother. The woman who had vanished after the crash. Did they say where she is? He asked, his voice quieter now. Emily hesitated. They said she's with them. The words landed like a punch. John's jaw clenched. What does that mean? Emily's blue eyes lifted to his. I don't know. A pause. Then, softer. But they want me to come with them now. John's blood ran cold. No, his voice was firm, immediate. You're staying here. Emily's expression didn't change. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She just stared at him. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the trees. John's stomach turned. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in monsters. But whatever had stood outside that door last night, whatever had spoken, was something he didn't understand. And now, it wanted Emily. He stood abruptly. We're leaving. Emily blinked. Where? Town. His voice was gruff. I don't care if I have to carry you through the damn snow, we're getting out of here. For the first time, something flickered in Emily's eyes. Not fear. Not sadness. Something close to sorrow. They won't let us leave, she whispered. A heavy silence settled between them. John's jaw clenched. Watch me. He turned, moving to the supply cabinet. He would pack light, just enough to make the trek down the mountain. It would take hours, but he wasn't staying here another night. As he gathered supplies, he heard Emily shift behind him. Then she whispered, John. Something in her voice made him freeze. Slowly, he turned. Emily was staring past him. At the window. John's breath caught in his throat. A shadow stood just beyond the glass. Tall. Unmoving. Eyes glowing faintly in the dim morning light. Not a wolf. Not human. Something in between. And it was waiting. John's fingers tensed around the rifle, but he didn't lift it. He wasn't even sure if he should. The thing at the window didn't move. It stood unnaturally still, its silhouette blending with the tree line, its glowing eyes locked onto him. It was watching. Waiting. The cabin had never felt smaller. But she didn't move. He chanced a glance at her, she wasn't afraid. If anything, she looked calm. They came for me, she whispered. John's pulse hammered. He turned back toward the window, sweat prickling the back of his neck. Like hell they did. The figure shifted. Not stepping forward, just changing, its edges blurring, like mist caught in the wind. John's grip tightened on the rifle. What do you want? He called, his voice rough. The figure tilted its head slightly. Then, in that same guttural, inhuman voice that had spoken through the door last night, it answered. She does not belong to you. A cold weight dropped into John's stomach. Beside him, Emily inhaled sharply. Mama. John's head snapped toward her. His skin went cold. What? Emily's wide blue eyes shimmered with something unreadable. It's her. John's pulse roared in his ears. No. That wasn't possible. He turned back toward the figure, but it was already moving. Not stepping, not walking, just drifting away from the window, back toward the trees, its glowing eyes never leaving his. Emily took a shaky step forward. Mama, wait. John grabbed her wrist before she could get any closer. No, his voice was sharp, firm. That's not your mother. Emily looked up at him, her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but then, a sound filled the air. A long, low howl. Not just one. Many. John's blood turned to ice. The forest was waking up. The trees whispered with unseen movement. The snow, so still just moments ago, now seemed to pulse with quiet life. And deep in the woods, a dozen pairs of glowing eyes flickered into view. Not just wolves. Something else. Emily exhaled softly. They've come to take me home. John's breath caught. He wasn't going to let that happen. He didn't care what they were. He didn't care how impossible this was. He was not letting them take her. He turned, gripping her wrist tighter. We're leaving. Now. Emily hesitated, but this time, she didn't argue. John grabbed his pack, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and yanked open the cabin door. The cold hit him like a punch, but he didn't stop. He hoisted Emily into his arms and stepped out into the snow. The glowing eyes in the forest blinked once. Then, slowly, the shadows began to move. John set his jaw, adjusting his grip on Emily. He didn't know if he could outrun them. But he was damn sure going to try. John's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to run, to do something, but against this, he didn't know how. The figure in front of him, the thing wearing the shape of a woman, watched him with those glowing, inhuman eyes. The wolves circled in silent unison, their breath steaming in the frigid air. The trees groaned under the weight of the wind, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. John tightened his grip on Emily, his heart hammering. "I don't care what you are," he ground out, forcing steel into his voice. "You're not taking her." The figure regarded him, then took a slow step forward. "John." The voice was deep, distorted, something ancient. "You do not understand." John forced himself to breathe. "Stay behind me," he murmured to Emily.